being able to care about things without being overwhelmed by that caring is a very difficult thing. Practical Stoicism. It's a phrase that is pretty common today. There are several podcasts along those lines. Practical Stoicism, the Practical Stoic. There's at least one book I know of that's something like Practical Stoicism. That term practical, what that means is, well, being able to work in reality and within the complexity of life. And in some sense, you don't need to call Stoicism practical because it is a very practical philosophy inherently, but there are a lot of beliefs in there, and yes, they are beliefs, and there are a lot of lessons in there that are abstract, like any philosophy, like any religion. And so when we're talking about the practical side of Stoicism, we're talking about what we can apply here, right now. And it tends to get a lot of focus in modern Stoicism for good reason, because in large part we've moved away from religion as a society, and we're trying to find our way back there, I think, practically, while still being aligned with science. That is, well, that's the journey of our lives. But I recently finished rewatching Game of Thrones, the series. I've read the books and I've watched the series, of course, twice. And it really got me thinking about this idea of practical stoicism. Because there's a lot of examples in Game of Thrones of characters that you really like, that you really respect, that are honorable, that end up not doing too well for themselves. Spoiler alert, I'm going to say that right now. But Ned Stark, for those who have watched in the first season, he's a very honorable character. Very honorable, very stoic in many ways. He focuses on virtue. He focuses very hard on doing what's right. He does what's right. He's very disciplined. He doesn't fear death. And yet, at the end of season 1, he gets his head lopped off. Now, that's not too good. And so, we have that example. We have another example, his son, Robb Stark. Another example of someone who's very honorable. He did make some very tragic mistakes, but someone who's very respectable, someone that we like, that's very virtuous, yet they fall short. He gets slaughtered at a wedding. Jon Snow, yet another. There's several characters throughout this series that we look to and we like them. We can't help but like them because they are strong. They are able to do what a lot of people can't do, and yet they don't end up on the good side of things. And so what do we make of that? Like, can we still consider these people Stoics? And it really speaks to this idea of practical Stoicism. Now, the first things first that I want to clarify is that just because the outcome is one that you might not like does not mean that the action leading up to that outcome is unstoic. Meaning, just because Ned Stark got his head lopped off, that doesn't mean that his actions leading up to that were unstoic. In the same way that just because Robb Stark got slaughtered at a wedding, that does not mean that he was unstoic. Because, again, in Stoicism, we try and detach ourselves from the outcome. We focus on doing what's right. But what is right? And what is right in Stoicism is what's practical. We live in a very complex world. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people really enjoyed a Game of Thrones, that series, because it has a lot of complex characters. There are people in there. There are fictional characters that are not simple. They're very complex, and the environment is complex. They're dealing with war. They're dealing with power problems. They're dealing with moral decisions, such as, should I be loyal to the crown, the government, say? Should I be loyal to my family? Should I be loyal to my friends? Should I be loyal to my house name? Should I be loyal to ancestors that used to be kings and queens? Game of Thrones is a great fictional story because it's able to represent the complexity of human life and of the world. And so what is this whole idea of practical Stoicism? Well, Stoicism is about how to apply virtue in the world. Stoicism is about being virtuous, trying to be virtuous, aiming up. And the practical side of Stoicism is about knowing how to apply virtue in a world that is complex, that is rarely simple. That's the practical side of Stoicism. It's about navigating this very complex world in a way that you can actually apply virtue, that you can aim up, that you can do your best. And a big part of this practical side is flexibility. Flexibility. Now, what is flexibility? No, I'm not talking about making sure you can touch your toes. I don't care about your hamstring flexibility. I mean, if you're having back problems, maybe stretch those things out. But no, by flexibility, I mean flexibility with which virtues you are tying yourself to. There are 4 cardinal virtues in Stoicism: justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. And there are many other virtues. There's generosity, kindness. There's a lot of virtues that might not be cardinal. They might not be solid and foundational. And if you are being a Stoic, if you are practically being a Stoic, you are, by definition, living according to the cardinal virtues: justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. However, this idea of flexibility, let's look at the character of Ned Stark. Was he a Stoic? Well, he was just about as Stoic as anyone else you can think of. But he wasn't perfect. He wasn't a perfect Stoic. He tended to be really focused towards his family, which is Stoic, of course, but there can cross a boundary there. But the biggest mistake he made as a Stoic, and this might shock some of you, but he did not play the political games. Meaning, he came into a political environment. He came down to King's Landing, which is the capital, which is full of politics, just like our governments today. And he tried to just be honorable. He didn't care about the game. He didn't care about all of the politics. He didn't want to get involved into it. He didn't want to learn it. He didn't want to play it. And he died. And so you could look at someone like Ned Stark and you could say, because again, this is a very complicated topic, you could say maybe he was a Stoic because he was honorable. He lived by his name. He lived by his word. He was who he said he was. He tried to do the right thing. He tried to be honest. And that is honorable. There's no doubt about that. But it wasn't exactly Stoic. It wasn't exactly stoic because it wasn't practical. He came down to be the key advisor, the second most powerful person in the kingdom. He came to be that person. And he foolishly did not learn the game. He foolishly was inflexible and held himself to this code of honor against everything else. And it cost him. He lost. He lost hard. Now, again, just because he lost doesn't mean he wasn't stoic. But the fact that he tried to come into this very complicated environment and did not learn how to play the game, that is unstoic. It's kind of like going into a chess tournament when you haven't played before. Only in this game of chess, there are a lot of moral consequences. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. So flexibility, number one. As a practical Stoic, you have to be a little flexible. What that means is that if you're Ned Stark down in the Capitol and there's all these political games going around about you, you might not want to hold yourself to the virtue of honesty. You might have to be a little careful about what you're saying. You might have to be careful about what you're saying in front of which people. And that's not a lie. That's wisdom. Number two, outcomes. A Stoic does not attach themselves to outcomes. However, a practical Stoic does consider outcomes. Meaning, if you're Ned Stark and you're going down to the Capitol and you're going to be very honest with everyone, you have to consider what outcome that is going to have. And you have to think, is that really the best strategy? Is this really the best long-term strategy? Will this produce the best outcome? It's not that we attach ourselves to the outcome. It's not that we even hope for a particular outcome, but it is that we consider outcomes. And this is really tied in with flexibility. You can imagine the situation where, let's say, a friend asks you for an honest opinion. You have to use your judgment there. You have to consider the outcome. Is it worth being brutally honest here, or is it not? And I'll give you a great example, one that I brought up in the past. There's this scene in Afterlife, just an amazing series on Netflix with Ricky Gervais. And there's this child there who has cancer. And he's talking to Ricky's character in the show. And Ricky's character, up to this point, has made it very clear he does not believe in God, he does not believe in heaven. Yet he's confronted with this really young child who is about to die of cancer. And he asks Ricky's character, he says, "Do you believe in heaven?" Now you could be inflexible and tie yourself to the virtue of honesty. And you could say, "No, I do not believe in heaven." But you cannot call that a Stoic action. That is not a Stoic action. A Stoic would consider the outcome. A Stoic would consider this is a child that's about to die of cancer. If I tell him this lie, we don't need to sugarcoat it. It is a lie. If we tell him this lie, maybe he'll die a little bit more peacefully. Putting that in a different context, let's say it's a child that isn't sick. And they ask, do you believe in heaven? Well, that might be an opportunity to discuss that maybe heaven is real, maybe it's not, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe you go into Stoic principles. The difference is that in the case of a child dying with cancer, you are considering the outcome. And that's not unstoic. In fact, that's very Stoic. You don't attach yourself to it, but you have to consider it if you are going to be practical. Number 3, focusing on what you can control. The dichotomy of control, the most over-discussed topic in Stoicism, so I won't spend too much time on that. But when you're in a complex environment, when you're in a complex situation, you have to be able to discern what's up to you and what is not. And you have to be able to cut out a lot of the noise. Because if you can't, you're going to get overwhelmed with the complexity. Number 4, balance compassion with principles. Compassion with principles. We briefly touched on that earlier. This idea of being honorable at no end. Or the idea of, again, telling a child dying of cancer that you believe in heaven, as opposed to tying yourself to the principle of honesty. You're balancing compassion with principles there. And that's important in practical Stoicism. Number 5, and you could really call this temperance or waiting for the right moment. You see, context is important and timeliness is important. Timing is everything. And you might, as a practical Stoic, you might have an action. You might have something that you have to do that is the Stoic thing to do. But it might not be Stoic to do it right now. It might be Stoic to do it at a later date. Here's a great example. Let's say you have an employee that works for you, and you have some constructive criticism that you have to give them. And you plan to do it today. You plan to do it on Friday or Tuesday. You're listening to this on a Tuesday. Let's say you plan to do it today on a Tuesday. They come in your office and they tell you that they had a really rough night. They had a fight with their wife and they're not doing so great. The Stoic thing to do as someone's manager is to be honest with them, to tell them the truth, to give them constructive criticism so that they can improve. But given this context, the Stoic thing to do is not to do that right now, but to wait until a better moment. Again, practical Stoicism. A lot of things have to be done, but they have to be done in the right time. Number 6. This is a tough one. Caring without being overwhelmed. Good God, is this a tough one? Being able to care about things without being overwhelmed by that caring is a very difficult thing. You can imagine the people in your life that you care about. You can get overwhelmed by that. You can get overwhelmed by what more can I do for this person? Can I make them more comfortable? Can I give them some more money? Can I support them better? Can I be there more emotionally for them? And like every person in your life, you're going to watch people you love and care about do things that you agree with and do things that you disagree with. You're going to see people do things that you're pretty certain is not good for them. And you have to learn how to care for someone and love them without being overwhelmed by that care, without being overwhelmed by those emotions. In essence, you have to still be able to think clearly despite having a deep care for people. And that's really hard. It's really hard to do. But again, practical stoicism. That's what it's all about. And so let me recap a little bit. I mentioned 6 things there. How to be practical as a Stoic. Be flexible. Consider the outcome. Focus on what you can control. Balance compassion with your principles. Wait for the right moment to do the right action. And figure out how to care about something without being overwhelmed by it. Practical stoicism, practical wisdom, it doesn't dilute Stoic values. It doesn't take away from justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. It is justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. It's just taking those virtues, justice, wisdom, courage, temperance, and integrating them into the real complex scenarios that life gives you. Through this framework, through practical stoicism, you actually have a very versatile guide for navigating life's inevitable challenges. In some, it's about balancing ideals with pragmatism in a way that honors both virtue, that thing that Stoicism says we should aim for, and reality.